Hello, my name is Yaroslav Halchenko and I'm happy to present further topics discussing bits and other aspects of data management and standardization and tracking. So the first question which I want to talk about is how could we enable bits to communicate in the language of World Wide Web? And what do I mean by that is that we came up with bits, right? So we know what bits is about and how datasets are structured, right? So we know how to lay out those files and where the metadata is stored. But then we still need to resort to documentation to actually describe for other humans many of those terms. Let's say which population was that in the non-control group, right? And various aspects of processing, because bits doesn't yet exactly captures it. But also bits is really neuroimaging specific. We came up with bits in neuroimaging world, and outside technologies which are accepted or developed by W3C, which is World Wide Web Consortium, they don't know about bits, right? But they came up with other standards besides HTML and CSS for web pages. They came up with RDF, linked data, and prof standards, which allow us to use that language and maybe already existing ontologies and dictionaries such as schema.org to use those terms and define relationships as this one to describe people, right, with standard terms. Using that language, we can then describe also various aspects of neuroimaging study, right? Starting from experiment, how do we build up experiment, then analytics workflow, and the results. So we would use then IDM vocabularies and use prof, which is provenance family of specifications of W3C, to describe those relationships between different aspects in neuroimaging study. And then such information could be converted or represented as simple JSON files with a little bit flavor to them. So there will be not just any JSON file, but JSON LD file, which defines the context in which these terms and keys appear in, right? Schema.org. So if you go to schema.org, you'll find all those pretty much elements which are presented in this figure. And we will define type, that it's recipe. So such a record then, if present on the web, could be picked up by search engines such as Google and provide this structured information. That's how World Wide Web actually presents you information about the websites based on those records which use schema.org vocabularies and definitions. So let's talk about NIDM project more. NIDM formalized language to describe neuroimaging studies using the language for the web, and it extended W3C Pro standard into neuroimaging and provides links to components at different research stages. A sub-project within that effort is NIDM terms, which was already carried out to annotate many terms within BIDs. And there is a tool called within PyNIDM distribution, which would help you to annotate your BIDs datasets with all those terms which are otherwise not standardized within BIDs. You're invited to watch the YouTube video where Dave Keeler presents how to use those tools, and also visit NIDM Terms website to discover more about those terms. The next question I want to tackle, position me to make this picture even more horrific, how to efficiently organize all this data, right? So we have bits data set, but then we have also containers to analyze those bits data sets. We have code, we have papers. So how do we organize our workflows or our collection of data to make it efficient and also retrieval later on not problematic? And here we will talk about Yoda. That's why there is that figure. Right, so what Yoda principles are, for which I'll provide ChatGPT the abbreviation on the next slide. The points are that you define computing environments for your analytics, right? And that's why you hear a lot probably about containers recently, it's not like my HPC head node or whatever, which provides you some installation. It's specific modular portable element container which you could deploy at different locations and also associate with your study. And that's the point of the second point of Yoda principles, that you track all the components necessary for analytics within version control system, right? So you put data, you put code, you put computational environments. To some degree, then depending on what your version control system is, you might want to structure it so all those components also reside under the same folder, right? So you could place everything in that folder under version control, so it wouldn't then rely on components outside, which might disappear, right? So you have full control for that study, have all the containers within that folder. So that's why, let's say, Singularity is better than Docker, because you have, you could put that file right there in that folder to some degree. To some degree, Singularity better than Docker in that sense. And then you structure those components in modular fashion, so you don't have 1 2 terabyte folder, but you have components with that folder which could live independently, right? So you could copy that folder and use it somewhere else, so you don't intermingle, let's say, raw and derived data within the same folder. You keep them separate so they could be reused. And to discover more about Yoda principles, here's 2 links which I advise you to follow. But here is abbreviation how ChatGPT described Yoda principle, right? So it's Yoda's obvious, decisive, and astute principles. I think they're quite astute, so I like this definition, and here we go. I'll follow through on this example. So in this example, we could go from raw data, which would, be a folder, let's say, with your raw DICOMs, which you then nest inside your to-be bits dataset, right? So you create a folder, let's say my bits dataset, and you put the raw data as your source data folder within your bits dataset, and then you do all conversion within that folder into bits, right? For that purpose, you could even use maybe containers and embed them also in this dataset or that folder. And that folder then could become part of pre-processed dataset, right? So bits derivative dataset is a dataset which is derived from another bits derivative, right? So if your source data is a bits dataset, here we go. So you have bits derivative datasets such as fMRI prep. So you did your analytics, maybe reusing the same containers dataset, which I advocate you to look into Repronim containers collection of datasets which are containing bits Singularity images, so they could be used on any HPC or locally under Linux or even macOS. So we provide bits apps, Neurodesk applications, and Brainiac. So fMRI prep dataset could contain pointers to, or contain bits dataset, and also containers which were used to produce that dataset. And that dataset could be nested within your analytics or analysis. So you do some analysis based on your preprocessed data, you create a dataset for that which has access to all the previous stages, right? So you could kind of unroll it all the way, right? And then we talk about paper, which was done based on one or maybe multiple analyses, right? And again, you could kind of unroll all the way down if it's needed to. So that's pretty much example of your Yoda compliant setup. But how could else it look on the hard drive? Here is a kind of prototypical example of that analysis folder, which contains code, which might have pointers to third-party library, has containers, has inputs, and ideally it should be well described. So you should have at least README-MD where people could go and discover what the heck this dataset or folder is about, right? And here Yoda comes and tells us that learn controls size matter or not, but we'll wait for that, and we'll talk more about, okay, we've come up with these Yoda compliant datasets, but where do we store and share this data, right? And I won't call it bury, but yeah. So how do we share this data? And for a list of available resources, I decided to just reuse the one which are listed for scientific data publication. This page provides you some sizes of what is available if you are publishing in that journal. If you are not, then sizes probably would be less. Let's say Figshare, I believe only 20 gigabytes is available. But then on Zenoda, I believe also it's some few gigabytes. But the beauty of Zenoda that you could link it to your GitHub and create automatically those DOI referenceable resources. What I advise you to do is actually look into data archives which are created specifically for your domain. Like in our case in neuroscience, and in particular in neuroimaging, we have OpenNeuro, right? Which can take all your raw bits data and publish it online in the cloud in S3 for free, right? And you'll get also DataLad datasets for free out of this procedure. There is also Gnode, which uses the same Gitanix as DataLad underneath. There is also Nitric and eBrains, and we have Dandy archive primarily for electrophysiology data, but also microscopy data. So you just need to find the archive which is best fitted for your needs and upload data there. But also look at resources where you could share in addition. Okay, another resource where you could share, upload data, and actually do analytics is Brainlife, about which you'll discover more from Franco Pistilli, but I just want to kind of touch upon it briefly. It allows you to, it's non-commercial, it allows you storage and compute on your data, and also really nice visualizations for your results. Overall, the platform has ways to import the data. You could also use import data from OpenNeuro using DataLad, pre-process the data, do batch processing, which will be executed on some high-performance computing available to Brainlife, and provide publications. And those publications will have really nice tracking of provenance. So although internally it doesn't use DataLad, right, it provides some notion of version control within this provenance collection. So again, you could kind of fulfill Yoda principles without using DataLad, but let's say Brainlife, I would say fulfilling Yoda principles which you defined. Okay, having this collection of resources where we could publish the data in standard form, how do we manage all this data across all these possible locations, right? What if we find it on local hard drive or somewhere in the cloud? How do we remember where did we store that data set in the past? For that purpose, I want to introduce you DataLad, the toolkit which I developed with my German colleagues. And ChatGPT provides abbreviation DataLad for DataLad, which is data, lightweight, access, and distribution, which I liked, but it doesn't provide full picture because DataLad also allows you not only access and distribute data, but also manage and version control files in decentralized fashion. And so you know where those files are available and you don't have to share, right? So DataLad is Git based and pretty much it adheres to the same principle as Git. If you don't share that clone with anybody publicly, if you don't publish it on GitHub publicly, nobody sees your data, right? So you could track all your data across all of your computers based on Git, using Git as underlying mechanism. And to learn much more, I would advise you to go and read handbook.datalad.org and do it daily in the evening. And in the morning you will wake up and with these wonderful ideas, how could you use DataLad in your research project. But okay, let's just continue to just overview what commands are available in DataLad. Here you can see that one of the basic principles which I've mentioned before, that you could nest one dataset inside of another. And we use Git mechanism for this, which is called Git modules, right? So Git submodules, you see this file. So within Git modules, we describe that this dataset could be obtained from some URL and placed at this location, let's say as raw data, right? So DataLad allows you to do this installation from the remote resources. You could create new datasets using commands like create, or you could add new content. Actually, DataLad add is gone. There is DataLad save, which saves the entire state of the dataset. You could use extensions such as DataLad crawl extension, with which you could crawl external resources such as S3 bucket or website. You define which URLs to get from that website. You could create remotes, so there is collection of DataLad create sibling commands, so you could create sibling on GitHub or GitLab or just local over SSH on some server. You could export data which is present in the DataLad dataset as a tarball or even upload it to Figshare. And overall, DataLad allows you to store information on local devices, remote or in the cloud, and data access is streamlined, so you don't care where it is, you know how to get to it through the same commands, which is really convenient. And then you don't care either it comes from OpenNeuro, CoinP, Indy, so all those providers provide data which is accessible through DataLad datasets. Also, it provides ways to manage authentication and different access schemes. And some of the beauties is that you could share those DataLad datasets on GitHub. So data will reside somewhere in the cloud or in some resource or maybe privately on your server, and then you share only the view of the data and access information. If somebody doesn't have access to those, let's say your server in the closet, they will not gain access to it. They will just know that it's in the server in the closet if you gave that description for that clone, right? And again, I advise you to just read more about DataLad in the handbook. And as an exercise, I'll present you fully Yoda-style neuroimaging analysis done in this one slide, in which we first create a dataset. Let me just use myself as a pointer. So you could create a dataset in which you configure immediately that, let's say, text files will go into Git and only binary files will go into Annex. Then you install that container which I mentioned with all the useful analytics pipelines already present as a dataset. You install it as a sub-dataset, so you have access to all the Singularity containers. You could even optionally freeze the version, so later on, if you update the sub-dataset, you will still be using that particular MRI-QC version in the next line. And then you install your source data, right? As I mentioned, source data is a good location as a folder name, to store the source data for your analytics. And you just configure it more. And here is an example of save command where we save, introduce changes, we modify .git ignore, and then we run the analytics, right? So in this case, we'll run MRI-QC, and we'll just specify that our source data folder is the input. So later on, if we use DataLad rerun command, we will be able, or DataLad will be able to get all the source data, and this MRI-QC execution will be re-executable. So we'll talk more about that during our real-life session, but I hope that this introduction was informative, and I advise you to follow all those links which you find through the slides. Thank you.